Mom says you're working late tonight, so we'll have to eat dinner without you again, Millie said without looking up, her fingers tapping furiously on her phone screen. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 6. I'll try to wrap up early, I said, keeping my voice steady. You know I'm working extra to cover your college savings? She sighed as if the mere mention of responsibility bored her. Yes, sure. After a beat, she added nonchalantly, Mom says you stress too much about money. That made me pause. I set my coffee mug down and looked at her. She said that? Millie shrugged, still focused on her screen. Yeah, like yesterday or something. She says you work yourself to death for no reason. We'd be fine even if you cut back. Her words stirred something in me, but I kept my tone calm. It's not just about being fine. It's about making sure you have a good future. Things like college, emergencies. Okay. She interrupted, clearly uninterested. She pushed her chair back and stood. Anyway, I have a thing with Chloe. Don't wait up. Hold on, I said, stopping her mid-stride. Dinner's already planned. And Chloe? I thought you two weren't talking after that argument last week. Millie froze for half a second before spinning on her heel. We patched it up, she said quickly. Mom knows, okay? She said it's fine. I opened my mouth to ask more, but closed it again. Something felt off. The way she brushed past me, with a practiced air of indifference. The way her explanations felt just a little too rehearsed. But what could I say? She was a teenager. They lived in a world of half-truths. I sighed and reached for my car keys. Just be back before 10, I called as the front door slammed shut behind her. Later that evening, the house was eerily quiet. I'd finished my work and was flipping through TV channels, waiting for Anastasia to return from whatever errand she had claimed to be running. Her absence lingered longer than usual, and my attempts to text her had gone unanswered. At 9:30, her car finally pulled into the driveway. I heard the door slam and her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Hey, she greeted casually, placing a few shopping bags on the kitchen counter. Long day? Yeah, I replied, watching her closely. Where were you? Target, she said without hesitation. They had a sale on home stuff. Figured I'd grab a few things we needed. She began unpacking candles, cleaning supplies, and a random assortment of items. Her movements deliberate but lacking the usual warmth. I waited for her to meet my gaze, but she didn't. You didn't answer my texts, I said. She glanced up briefly, flashing a quick smile. Oh, sorry. My phone was buried in my purse. You know how it is? Something in her tone made my stomach churn. Millie mentioned you think I stress too much about money, I said, testing the waters. Anastasia's hands paused for a fraction of a second before she resumed unpacking. She told you that? Kids, huh? Always misinterpreting things. I just meant you should take it easy sometimes, that's all. You work so hard. Her answer was smooth, almost too smooth. The following day, as I sat in my home office preparing a report, Millie's voice drifted in from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone animated. I couldn't help but catch snippets of her conversation. I told you, Dad won't even notice, she said, laughing. He's clueless about everything. All he does is work. The dismissiveness stung. For a moment, I debated confronting her, but something told me to hold back. Maybe she was just being a rebellious teenager, pushing boundaries. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, Anastasia came to bed late. She smelled faintly of wine, her steps unsteady as she climbed under the covers. Did you have a drink with the girls? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Yeah, she murmured, her back to me. Just a quick catch-up. Nothing exciting. I watched her as she drifted off to sleep, her breathing evening out. The pieces didn't add up. The quick, vague explanations, the subtle avoidance of eye contact. It wasn't like her. I lay awake for hours, the quiet darkness pressing in around me. The little moments of doubt I'd ignored for months, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the sudden defensiveness, they all came rushing back. By morning, I resolved to find the truth. The first step was subtle. I glanced at her phone while she was in the shower, noting a few unfamiliar names in her recent messages. I didn't open anything yet. Then, over the next few days, I began paying closer attention. Every hurried phone call, every unexplained errand, every moment she seemed distracted. I listened carefully, cataloging details. And then came the moment I wasn't ready for. The garage was quiet except for the rhythmic drip of the faucet I had just tightened. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag, feeling satisfied with the fix. Sunday evenings were supposed to be peaceful, a time to unwind after a long week. But as I headed back inside, the sound of Millie's laughter stopped me in my tracks. I paused in the hallway. Her laugh wasn't the usual dismissive chuckle I was used to hearing from her. This was different, light, carefree. It was followed by a boy's voice, low and casual, speaking from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me. Who was she talking to? Chloe? Her best friend? No, this was definitely a guy. I walked closer, careful not to make a sound, and stopped just outside the door. It was slightly ajar, enough for me to hear without being seen. Dad has no clue about Mom's secret family, Millie said, her tone smug and confident. My stomach dropped. I leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Every Sunday, while Dad's busy working like the clueless drone he is, Mom takes us to visit our half-siblings, she continued, her words dripping with disdain. Her lover? Total upgrade. He's got this insane supercar that my broke-ass dad could never afford, even if he worked double shifts for the rest of his life. The boy chuckled. Seriously? And your dad doesn't suspect anything? Not a thing, Millie replied, the grin evident in her voice. I'm counting down the days until Mom finally divorces him so we can all live our best lives together, with real money. This family? Total dead weight. I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My vision blurred for a moment as a wave of emotions surged: shock, anger, disbelief. My breathing slowed as I tried to steady myself. I mean, can you imagine? Millie continued, laughing. Dad's so boring, always talking about savings and college funds like it's the most important thing in the world. Mom says it's pathetic. She says once she's free of him, we'll finally have everything we deserve. The boy let out a low whistle. Man, your mom's guy must be loaded if he's got a supercar. What's he do? Something with investments or stocks or whatever. I don't know. All I know is he's 1,000 times better than Dad. Mom's got it all planned out. She says it's only a matter of time before we're out of this dump for good. The conversation continued, but I couldn't hear it anymore. My head buzzed with rage and confusion. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides as I stepped back from the door, careful not to make any noise. I walked to the kitchen, every step deliberate. I leaned on the counter, staring at nothing in particular, the weight of what I'd just heard pressing down on me. How long had this been going on? How much of my life had been a lie? I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. The betrayal wasn't just Anastasia's. It was Millie's too. My own daughter, laughing at my expense, conspiring with her mother. The arrogance in her voice was what stung the most. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching and quickly composed myself. Millie appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, a satisfied smirk on her face. Hey, Dad, she said casually, as if nothing was wrong. Hey, I replied, my voice steady, giving nothing away. You good? She asked, glancing at me briefly before turning her attention back to her phone. Yeah, just finished fixing the faucet. I grabbed a glass and filled it with water, keeping my movements calm. Cool, she said, already half tuned out. She walked past me, heading upstairs, her laughter from the earlier conversation still echoing in my mind. I stood there for a long moment, the glass of water untouched in my hand. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into a void I couldn't comprehend. Later that night, I sat in my office, staring at the computer screen. The words Millie had said replayed in my head like a broken record. Dad has no clue. Mom's secret family, dead weight. I opened the browser and began typing. Divorce lawyers. Private investigators. My hands moved methodically, as though they belonged to someone else. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew I needed answers. The front door opened and closed softly. Anastasia was home. Her footsteps were light as she moved through the house, humming a tune. I turned off the monitor and walked out to the living room. Anastasia was unpacking a bag of groceries, her face calm, even cheerful. Hey, she said, looking up with a smile. You're still up? Yeah, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. How was your evening? Oh, just running errands. Nothing exciting. She turned back to the bag, pulling out a carton of eggs. I watched her carefully, studying her movements. Every little gesture felt like a potential clue now. Everything okay? She asked, sensing my gaze. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Just tired. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and returned to her task. I walked back to the office, closing the door behind me. I leaned against it, the weight of the evening pressing down on my chest. There was no denying it anymore. Anastasia was hiding something, and Millie was in on it. But I wasn't clueless. Not anymore. As I sat down at the desk again, a new resolve took hold. If they thought I was blind, they were about to see just how wrong they were. That night, I didn't confront Anastasia. My emotions churned, a toxic brew of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, but I forced myself to stay calm. Raging blindly would accomplish nothing. Instead, I went to the office and opened my laptop. The truth wasn't just something to discover. It needed to be undeniable, airtight. The first thing I did was comb through our bank statements. I examined every line with laser focus. There it was, unusual expenses Anastasia couldn't possibly explain away. Payments to high-end restaurants I'd never been to, charges for luxury goods she never brought home, and most glaringly, recurring transactions labeled Carillon Suites. I pulled up the website for Carillon Suites. It was a luxury hotel across town, the kind of place meant for secret meetings, not family vacations. My fists clenched as I stared at the screen. Next came her phone. She was a creature of habit, leaving it on the kitchen counter every night before bed. I waited until her soft snores signaled she was asleep, then quietly retrieved it. She hadn't bothered to delete her text history, probably confident I'd never look. Her messages with Michael confirmed everything. Can't wait for Sunday. Miss you already. Thinking of you. Last night was perfect. I'll tell him soon, I promise. My heart hammered as I scrolled further. Photos, too. Selfies of them together, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. The man was tall, polished, and smugly handsome, standing in front of a sleek red sports car that screamed excess. I sent everything to my email, including a photo of Anastasia kissing him, timestamped from last weekend. My hands trembled, but not from sadness anymore. I was angry, focused, and determined. The next morning, I woke early. Anastasia was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The sight was almost comical in its normalcy. Morning, she said with a bright smile, holding up the coffee pot. Coffee? No, thanks. I'm fine, I replied, my voice cold. She didn't seem to notice the chill. Suit yourself. Long day ahead? Something like that, I said, sitting at the table. Millie appeared moments later, scrolling on her phone as usual. Good morning, Anastasia said, her tone cheery. Morning, Millie mumbled, plopping into the chair across from me. I studied her face as she poured cereal into a bowl. She looked carefree, utterly unaware of the storm brewing. Plans today? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Chloe's house, she replied quickly, not looking up. I nodded, but said nothing more. They had no idea what was coming. That evening, I put my plan into motion. I texted Anastasia, let's have dinner together tonight. Just us. I'll pick up something nice. She replied almost immediately, sounds great. What time? 7, I wrote back. I didn't go to a restaurant. Instead, I printed everything, the bank statements, texts, photos, and receipts, and placed them neatly into a folder. Then I went to the store, grabbed a cheap bottle of wine, and came home. Anastasia was already waiting in the dining room when I walked in. She'd lit candles and set the table, a soft smile on her face. You're in a romantic mood, she teased as I placed the wine on the table. Something like that, I said, sitting down. She poured 2 glasses, handing one to me. To us, she said, raising hers in a toast. I clinked my glass against hers, but didn't drink. Instead, I placed a folder on the table. What's this? She asked, confused. Open it, I said simply. Her smile faltered as she flipped through the contents. The color drained from her face as she reached the photos, her hand shaking. Where did you? It doesn't matter, I interrupted, my voice steady. I know everything. John, she began, her voice trembling. I can explain. No, I said sharply, cutting her off. You don't get to explain. You don't get to lie your way out of this. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Was it worth it? I asked. Was he worth it? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. You've been playing me for a fool for years, I continued, my voice rising. And you dragged our daughter into it. Did you think I wouldn't find out? John, please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. A mistake? I scoffed, leaning forward. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. This is a calculated betrayal. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I can fix this, she pleaded. We can fix this. I stood, towering over her. There's no fixing this, Anastasia. I'm done. Her sobs grew louder as she buried her face in her hands. I walked away, leaving her to her tears. I didn't see Millie until later that night. She stormed into my office, her face red with anger. What the hell, Dad? She snapped. Excuse me? I said, raising an eyebrow. Mom told me everything. How could you do this to her? How could I do this to her? I repeated, my voice calm but firm. You mean, how could I hold her accountable for cheating? For lying to me? For disrespecting this family? She made a mistake. Millie shouted. Stop calling it a mistake, I said, my voice hard. And what about you? Laughing behind my back? Calling me clueless? You were just as complicit. Her expression faltered for a moment before she crossed her arms defensively. Maybe if you weren't so boring, she wouldn't have looked for someone else. The words stung, but I didn't let it show. You know what, Millie? You're just like her. Selfish, entitled, and blind to the consequences of your actions. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. By the end of the week, I had filed for divorce. Anastasia begged me to reconsider, but her tears meant nothing now. The damage was done. Millie refused to speak to me, siding with her mother. I let her go. My energy was no longer wasted on people who didn't value me. As I watched the movers take the last of my belongings out of the house, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. This chapter of my life was over, but I was just beginning to write the next one. The days after discovering the full depth of Anastasia's betrayal were methodical. My emotions had burned down to a cold, steely resolve. Anger alone wouldn't cut it. I needed precision. So I focused, spending every spare moment preparing my exit. Monday morning, I called our bank. I need to separate my accounts, I told the representative firmly. Are you sure you want to do that? The woman asked politely. It will affect any joint credit cards, and that's exactly what I want, I interrupted. By noon, the joint cards were canceled, and my individual savings were secure in a new account under my name only. Anastasia wouldn't know until her next attempted purchase was declined. Tuesday evening, I packed the essentials. A suitcase with my clothes, a box with personal documents, birth certificate, passport, financial records, and a few sentimental items I couldn't bear to leave behind. I avoided Anastasia and Millie as much as possible, sticking to my office or the garage. Whenever Anastasia tried to chat casually, I kept my responses short, giving nothing away. Everything okay? She asked at dinner that night, her fork paused midair. Fine, I replied, not meeting her gaze. She tilted her head. You've been quiet lately. Work's busy, I lied, taking a sip of water. She accepted the excuse without pressing further, her attention soon shifting back to Millie, who was complaining about some drama with her friends. Wednesday afternoon, I found the perfect place. A modest one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, far enough to feel like a fresh start, but close enough for convenience. It's available for immediate move-in, the landlord said as he handed me the keys. Perfect, I replied, shaking his hand. I spent the rest of the day setting up utilities and arranging for movers. By the time I got home that night, Anastasia was already asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, watching her. She looked peaceful, innocent even, a cruel illusion. I turned and walked away. Thursday, I called my lawyer. I've compiled everything, I told him. Texts, photos, financial records. It's all in your inbox. He whistled softly. You weren't kidding. This is damning. I want the papers ready by tomorrow, I said. They will be, he assured me. Friday morning arrived. I woke up early, the house still quiet. Anastasia and Millie were both still asleep. I went to the kitchen, opened the folder containing the divorce papers, and placed them on the counter. On top, I left a handwritten note. You wanted to move on? Consider it done. Good luck with your upgrade. I stood there for a moment, staring at the note. There was a finality to it, a weight that settled on my shoulders but didn't crush me. If anything, I felt lighter. Grabbing my suitcase and the box I'd packed earlier, I walked out the door. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting the neighborhood in a soft orange glow. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't look back. By the time Anastasia found the papers, I was already at my new apartment. The movers arrived that afternoon, bringing the last of my belongings. As I unpacked, my phone buzzed with incoming messages. I ignored them at first, knowing exactly who they were from. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. The first was from Anastasia. John, what is this? Come home so we can talk. Then another, please don't do this. We can fix things. And another, call me. I'm begging you. I deleted them all without replying. That evening, as I sat in my new living room, the weight of the past week began to lift. For the first time in years, I was truly alone, but not lonely. The silence wasn't oppressive. It was liberating. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Millie. Dad, what's going on? Mom's crying. Call me. I stared at the screen for a moment before turning the phone off entirely. They'd had their chance to respect me, to value me. Now, they could deal with the fallout of their choices without me. Over the weekend, I began to rebuild. I changed my phone number, updated my address with the bank and my employer, and threw myself into work. Every task, no matter how mundane, felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. Anastasia's betrayal had been a storm, but I had weathered it. And as the days passed, I found myself looking forward, not backward. For the first time in a long time, the future felt like mine again. 3 years had passed since I walked out of that house, leaving the wreckage of my marriage and family behind. In that time, I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. The pain of betrayal had been a motivator, fueling my every move. I launched my own consulting business 6 months after the divorce, pouring all my energy into making it succeed. And it did, beyond my wildest expectations. Long hours turned into profitable contracts, and soon I was advising Fortune 500 companies on strategic growth. The money flowed in, and I invested it wisely, growing my wealth with the same precision I had used to dismantle my old life. Physically, I had transformed too. I spent early mornings at the gym, pushing myself to exhaustion. The mirror now reflected a man who was lean, confident, and self-assured, a far cry from the exhausted, betrayed husband I once was. Despite my success, I kept my circle small. Trust was not easily given anymore. Relationships, both personal and professional, were carefully vetted. My life was quiet, deliberate, and entirely my own. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. It was a Thursday evening when I found myself at an upscale business gala hosted by a prominent firm I had recently partnered with. The venue was grand, a luxurious ballroom filled with chandeliers and the murmur of ambitious conversations. I stood near the bar, sipping a whiskey neat, when I heard a voice behind me. "Hell of a turnout tonight," the man said, sliding up to the bar beside me. I glanced over and immediately recognized him. Michael. The photos I had uncovered 3 years ago didn't do him justice. He looked older now, stress lining his once polished features, but he still carried himself with the same smug arrogance. He didn't recognize me. "Yeah, quite the event," I replied evenly, turning my attention back to the bartender. Michael ordered a drink, then leaned against the bar. "You in finance?" he asked. "Consulting," I replied, keeping my answer short. "Good money in that," he said, nodding appreciatively. I allowed myself a faint smirk. "There can be." Michael gestured toward the entrance, where a valet had just pulled up in an extravagant red sports car. "See that? That's mine." I recognized the car immediately. It was the same one from the photos. "Impressive," I said, my voice calm. "What do you drive?" he asked, clearly fishing for an opportunity to boast further. Something practical, I replied with a shrug. He laughed, clearly enjoying his own wealth. Well, some of us like to live a little, you know. Living a little must get expensive, I said, turning slightly to face him. Especially if your business isn't doing so well. The comment caught him off guard. His smirk faltered, and he looked at me more closely. What's that supposed to mean? Just something I've heard, I said, my tone neutral but pointed. Word travels fast in our circles. Michael narrowed his eyes, but didn't respond. I drained the last of my whiskey and set the glass down on the bar. Tell Anastasia I said hello, I said casually, turning to walk away. His face turned pale. Wait, he stammered, realization dawning on him. I didn't let him finish. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I mingled with clients and industry contacts, maintaining my composed exterior, but inside I was buzzing. Running into Michael had been unexpected, but it didn't shake me. If anything, it reinforced how far I had come. By the end of the evening, as I left the gala and climbed into my modest but reliable sedan, I felt a sense of closure. Michael had no power over me anymore. Neither did Anastasia or Millie. Their betrayal had been a catalyst, but my success was my own. Driving home that night, I allowed myself a rare smile. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The gala was in full swing, the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses filling the opulent hall. Dressed in a dark tailored suit, I navigated the room with ease, exchanging polite nods and handshakes with other attendees. The air was thick with ambition and self-importance, but I was used to it. This was my world now. As I stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet, a flash of red caught my eye in the parking area below. The car was unmistakable, sleek, loud, and utterly ostentatious. A sports car meant to turn heads, and beside it stood Michael. Even after all these years, I recognized him instantly. He was holding court, a drink in one hand and gesturing animatedly with the other. A small crowd of admirers surrounded him, hanging on his every word. The sight of him made my chest tighten, not with anger, but with a strange sense of satisfaction. He looked older, worn, and the lines around his mouth hinted at struggles he was trying to mask with bravado. I descended the stairs back into the main hall, weaving through clusters of attendees until I stood within earshot of him. And that's the thing about business, Michael was saying, his voice dripping with self-importance. You've got to take risks if you want the rewards. Like this car. Sure, it cost a fortune, but it's an investment in my image. People see it and know I mean business. The small crowd murmured appreciatively. I stepped forward, a faint smile on my face. Hell of a car, I said, my voice cutting through the conversation. Michael turned, his eyes scanning me briefly before his lips curled into a smug grin. Thanks, he said, straightening up. Not everyone can appreciate a machine like this. Costs more than most people make in a lifetime. I nodded, feigning interest. Impressive. Though I imagine it's hard keeping up appearances like this, especially if the business side isn't holding up as well. His grin froze, a flicker of something crossing his face. Uncertainty, perhaps. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged, keeping my tone light. Oh, nothing. Just something I've heard around. Michael's smile tightened as he looked me over more carefully. Do I know you? He asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I stepped closer, closing the space between us just enough to unsettle him. Maybe, I said, letting the moment stretch. Or maybe it's just that some things and some people are unforgettable. His brow furrowed, and I could see him scrambling to place me. I decided to end the game before he caught up. Tell Anastasia I said hi, I added, my voice calm and deliberate. And congratulations on the real family. Michael's drink hovered in mid-air as his face turned pale. Wait, he stammered, but I had already turned and started walking away. I left the gala shortly after, stepping out into the cool night air. As I handed my valet ticket to the attendant, I glanced back toward the entrance. Michael was still standing by his car, his shoulders stiff, his drink now untouched. The valet pulled up in my modest sedan, and I slid into the driver's seat. As I drove away, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smirk. The encounter lingered in my mind as I navigated the quiet streets back to my apartment. It hadn't been planned, but it felt like a moment of poetic justice. Seeing Michael, less confident, more rattled, was a stark reminder of how far I had come. At a red light, I leaned back in my seat, the memory of his startled expression playing in my mind. The betrayal that had once consumed me now felt distant, like an old wound that had healed cleanly. I wasn't the man they had underestimated anymore. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I felt a sense of clarity. Michael, Anastasia, Millie, they were all parts of a chapter one had closed. Tonight had been a glimpse into their world, but I was glad to leave it behind. The past was theirs to grapple with. My future was my own. The cracks in Anastasia and Michael's facade appeared sooner than I expected. At first, it was subtle, a missed payment here, a canceled trip there. The lifestyle they had built on lies and debt began to falter, and it didn't take long for the house of cards to come crashing down. Michael's business, once a source of his smug confidence, collapsed under the weight of mismanagement and overspending. I had seen it coming. His flashy car, the expensive dinners, and the luxury vacations were all paid for on borrowed time. As creditors circled, he scrambled to salvage what he could, but the damage was done. One afternoon, as I scrolled through my phone, a news alert caught my eye. Local business owner files for bankruptcy amid mounting financial scandals. The accompanying photo was of Michael, looking haggard and far from the polished image he had once projected. I couldn't help but chuckle. Karma had a way of being thorough. Anastasia didn't fare much better. The man she had chosen as her upgrade was proving to be a downgrade in every way that mattered. The supercar? Repossessed. The lavish home they had moved into? Sold to cover debts. They were forced into a modest apartment, a far cry from the life they had envisioned. Millie, accustomed to the comforts of wealth, struggled to adjust. Her entitled attitude didn't win her many friends, and her grades slipped as the reality of their situation set in. The private school she had bragged about attending was replaced with a public one, and the resentment toward her parents was palpable. Meanwhile, my life was thriving. After that chance encounter with Michael, I felt a sense of closure. It was as if the universe had acknowledged the wrongs done to me and handed me the reins to a better future. My consulting business continued to grow, and with it came opportunities one had only dreamed of. But the greatest transformation wasn't professional. It was personal. I met Rachel at a networking event a year after the divorce. She was intelligent, grounded, and kind. There was no pretense with her, no games or hidden agendas. Our connection was immediate, and over time, we built a relationship based on trust and mutual respect. Rachel understood my past without judgment, and her warmth helped me rediscover parts of myself I thought were lost. Together, we traveled, laughed, and built a life that felt real. One evening, as Rachel and I were enjoying dinner on the balcony of our new home, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was a message from Anastasia. I know I have no right to ask, but can we talk? Please. Rachel noticed the shift in my expression. Everything okay? She asked. It's Anastasia, I said, setting the phone down. She wants to talk. Rachel reached for my hand. What do you want to do? I thought for a moment before shaking my head. Nothing. She made her choices. I'm not going back to that. Rachel nodded, her grip on my hand firm. You deserve peace, not old wounds. Despite my resolve, Anastasia was persistent. Over the next few weeks, her messages became more desperate. She called, left voicemails, and even sent letters. Each time, her words were laced with regret and apologies. I made a mistake. I see that now. I was wrong to betray you. Please, just give me a chance to explain. I'm sorry for everything. I'll do anything to make it right. But it was too late. The final attempt came in the form of an unannounced visit. I was in my office when the doorbell rang. Opening it, I was met with a version of Anastasia I barely recognized. She looked tired, worn down by life's blows. Can we talk? She asked, her voice trembling. I hesitated before stepping aside. You got 5 minutes? She stepped into the room, glancing around nervously. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she began, her eyes welling with tears. But I had to try. I've lost everything, and I know it's my fault. I ruined what we had, and I've been paying for it ever since. I crossed my arms, leaning against the desk. You're right. You don't deserve it. Her face crumpled, and she sank into the nearest chair. I was selfish. I thought I wanted something more, but all I did was destroy the best thing I ever had. You were good to me, and I threw it away. Her tears fell freely now, but I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a hollow detachment. You didn't just betray me, I said calmly. You betrayed our family, and you taught Millie to do the same. She sobbed, her hands covering her face. I know I failed as a wife and a mother. I've lost her too. She barely speaks to me anymore. I sighed, standing straight. Anastasia, I've moved on. I'm happy now. What we had is gone, and there's no bringing it back. Her eyes met mine, desperation shining in them. Please, just tell me there's a chance. Even if it's small. I'll do anything. I shook my head. No, Anastasia. There's no chance. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She sat there for a moment, her sobs quieting as the weight of my words sank in. Then, slowly, she stood. I'm sorry, she whispered before walking out the door. As I watched her leave, I felt a sense of finality. The chapter was closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. That evening, as Rachel and I sat by the fireplace, she leaned against me, her presence a comforting reminder of how far I had come. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded, wrapping an arm around her. More than okay. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of my new home, casting a warm glow on the hardwood floors. The crisp autumn air carried a subtle chill, but the coffee mug in my hands offered comforting warmth. I leaned against the balcony railing, watching the trees shed their golden leaves, a gentle reminder of how change was both inevitable and beautiful. It had been a long journey to get here. Looking back, the betrayal felt like another life, one I was grateful to have left behind. Anastasia's affair, Millie's arrogance, Michael's self-serving attitude, they had all been part of a toxic environment that I hadn't realized was suffocating me. Their betrayal had shattered my world. But in the ruins, I had found something unexpected: clarity. Rachel joined me on the balcony, her presence grounding and calm. She carried her own mug, the steam curling upward into the brisk air. Lost in thought again? She asked, smiling as she leaned on the railing beside me. Just reflecting, I said. She took a sip of her coffee and glanced out at the trees. Good memories or bad ones? A little of both, I admitted. Mostly good now. She nodded knowingly. Rachel never pushed for more than I was willing to share. It was one of the things I loved most about her, her patience, her quiet understanding. The phone buzzed on the patio table, pulling my attention. It was a notification from an old mutual acquaintance. Against my better judgment, I opened it. A forwarded article popped up. Michael Sinclair, former business mogul, faces fraud investigation amid bankruptcy claims. I let out a dry laugh. The article detailed Michael's fall from grace, accusations of embezzlement, lawsuits from former business partners, and a public scandal that had all but ruined his reputation. The man who had once bragged about his supercar and flashy lifestyle was now another cautionary tale. Another skeleton from the past? Rachel asked, noticing my expression. Michael, I said simply, holding the phone up for her to see. She read the headline and raised an eyebrow. Sounds like karma paid him a visit. It tends to, I replied with a shrug. Eventually, later that day, as I walked through the park near my home, I found myself reflecting on Millie and Anastasia. I hadn't heard from Millie since our last confrontation, though I'd been told she had dropped out of college. The lavish lifestyle she had grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by the harsh realities of her mother's and Michael's failures. As for Anastasia, the last message I received from her had been months ago. I know you've moved on, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry again. I hope you're happy. There was no anger left in me for her, just indifference. Anastasia had made her choices, and she was living with the consequences. Whatever regret or longing she felt now was her burden to carry, not mine. That evening, Rachel and I hosted a small dinner with a few close friends. As we laughed and shared stories, I couldn't help but marvel at how different my life was now. The people around me were genuine, supportive, and kind. After dinner, as the guests filtered out and the house grew quiet, Rachel turned to me. "You seem lighter tonight," she said, her eyes searching mine. "I feel lighter," I replied, pulling her close. She rested her head against my chest. "Do you think you'll ever fully let go of what happened back then?" "I already have," I said without hesitation. "What happened with Anastasia and Millie doesn't define me anymore. It shaped me, sure, but it also set me free." Rachel smiled. "Then I'd say you've won." The next morning, as I sat with my coffee on the balcony again, the thought struck me. I truly had won. Not in the petty sense of vengeance or schadenfreude, but in the sense that I had reclaimed my life. Anastasia and Michael had each other, along with the wreckage they'd created. Millie was navigating her own struggles, trying to find her way without the privileges she once took for granted. And me? I had peace, a career I loved, a partner who valued me, a life that felt authentic. I couldn't have asked for more. As the breeze rustled the trees and the smell of autumn filled the air, I raised my mug to no one in particular. "Here's to freedom," I said quietly, a smile tugging at my lips. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of the past, only the promise of the future.